This talk I like to call Greenhouse Tomatiology because it's the basics of greenhouse tomatoes. It touches on a lot of the essentials that growers need to know, and it does get into leading into more advanced areas. But when we're talking about greenhouse tomatoes, this is the image that people have in mind. Nice big fruit, clusters of 3 or 4 tomatoes, and lots of excellent quality, good sales, accompanied by good marketing and good profit margin. So I will say that, being in Mississippi, you think it's hot here all the time. Well, just want to point out that no, last year we had a blizzard, and here's the proof right here on my truck. And it was pretty bad. I mean, things were shut down for 2 hours maybe. And but we survived it, and it did melt by early afternoon, so we're okay. Now, why greenhouses? Let's start at the beginning. We're stepping all the way outside, looking in. Why greenhouses? Greenhouses allow us to modify the environment. The primary modifying feature is temperature control, but they do have some effect on light, on insects, diseases, and weeds, air pollutants, and water. Why water? Well, in tropical environments, there's way too much water. So the greenhouse can help shield the plants from excess water. So in summary, they allow you to grow a crop when it would be impossible. And in Connecticut and the Northeast region especially, that means you can harvest live, healthy, fresh harvested fruit in the winter months, and you certainly couldn't do that outside. Greenhouse tomatoes are a higher quality than the tomatoes grown in the field or in the high tunnel or in the home garden. They're for the marketing, and they are locally grown, and that's a very important thing to keep in mind when you're selling or marketing your tomatoes. They're vine ripened. They're never picked at the breaker stage and gassed with ethylene. They are more uniform in size and shape and color. They have a good red color, unless you're growing another color of tomato, but the red ones have a really nice red color because they're vine ripened, and good flavor. So if you grow them correctly with the right environmental controls, the right fertilizer and pH, they have excellent flavor. And this higher quality leads to higher value. So they should not be sold at the commodity prices of tomatoes grown in the field, whether from the US or from Mexico. This is a whole different class of specialty crop. So being an extension, I get lots of calls year round on people wanting to get into the business. Some of them want to start small. Some of them want to start with, a couple acres. And often they've never done it before. Somehow when people see pictures like this, it gives them the impression that it's easy and it looks easy. But I always tell people, no, for vegetable crops, this is one of the hardest things to grow, because you're not only managing the plant like you would outside with the fertility and water, you're managing the total environment. And they don't get any nutrients unless you supply them in the right amount. The same with water. So the grower has complete control, and excellent management leads to excellent production. But poor management can be a disaster. So lots to learn, lots to learn. Where are we with greenhouse production? This is actually undercover, so this would include tunnels. The number of operations, just look from 98 to 14, is like 2.5 times. So the growth is phenomenal. The sales, this is 2014 data from the census, $800 million undercover. Very significant production. How about the which vegetables? Between Canada, US, and Mexico, for many years, Canada was in the lead and US was straggling behind. But in the last 10 years, Mexican production has soared. So they have way more production than we do or than Canada does, and the acceleration of their growth is higher as well. And the other important thing to note here is that tomatoes are king when it comes to greenhouse. The Vegetables, tomatoes are the #1 crop, followed by, could be cucumber, pepper, lettuce, herbs, anything, depending on what region you're in and how sales are. Now we break it down among several different crops. And again, if you look at production tons, tomatoes are by far #1, 96,000 tons. This is just in the US undercover. So this is just the hydroponic, which would be greenhouse, pretty much synonymous with greenhouse, with $400 million. So what follows? Well, looking at value, cucumbers and herbs would be next. But in tons, lettuce. So the lettuce and cucumbers, lettuce follow. So tomatoes are always #1. The other crops follow depending on your marketing region. The growers, if they're not already growers, they have a lot to learn before getting into the hydroponic greenhouse tomato business. But always remember, that's the beginning. Growers learn every year. Everybody should be learning new things every year. I learn new things every year, every day, actually. So it's important to keep in mind that you need to keep learning, keep going to programs like this, reading extension bulletins, reading reputable sources online, and just keep learning. So we have several greenhouses in the US that are huge, multi-acre ranges. And by those, when I say huge, I'm thinking 50 acres and above in one piece. The biggest is probably the one in Arizona, where they have about 220 acres in one chunk, one piece of land. On the other hand, most of the growers in the US are small family-run farms. And I don't have an exact number. I don't think anybody does, but my feel is that there are over 1,000 small greenhouse producers in the US for vegetables. Same concepts, whether you're big or small. So before you grow, you need to line up your markets. So you grow, and then you will have to sell them, unless it's a hobby house and you're just eating everything that you grow. So you don't want to even think about growing greenhouse tomatoes until you have a market to sell them. So how do you do that? Visit local grocery stores, talk to the produce manager, look and see what they have in the store already. If they don't have anything greenhouse grown, talk about it. Explain to them why it would be good for them to carry it, and we'll get into that more later in the marketing section. But you want to be wholesale or retail? Wholesale is nice if you want to have 1 or 2 drops and you sell the whole crop. Retail is better if you want to make more per pound, more total income, but you're willing to spend a lot of time with each visitor. And sometimes people are very talkative and it can take a lot of time. So I like to say that if you're not a people person, you don't want to do retail. Or maybe somebody else in your family can handle the retail and you can handle the production side. If you're a small grower, is this a disadvantage? Doesn't have to be. Small growers have the advantage of selling locally. The big producers will have the chain stores all locked up. They'll have the big box stores and the huge grocery stores locked up. They'll be in the store. You can see them already. But in your small local stores, in small towns, rural counties, you have stores that those big producers will never touch. So sell locally and then use that as a marketing advantage. Finally, have alternative buyers. When a new grower goes into a store and discusses what he or she is producing, a lot of times the store is really impressed and they'll say, well, when you start harvesting, bring me everything you got. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And then the grower calls me and tells me about that and says, well, I brought 20 boxes to the store and they said they would take 4. So what do I do with the rest? And unfortunately, I don't know what you're going to do with the rest. So it's really better to have at least two and probably three buyers and then just split it up. And if somebody cuts their order, maybe somebody else will pick up the slack. You don't want to lose money on your beautiful produce. Getting educated is essential with meetings like this, extension bulletins, books, newsletters. Visiting other growers is a great way to learn, but I will point out that you don't necessarily want to visit a grower right near you because who wants that kind of competition? So talk to your extension specialist or agent, find somebody not quite so nearby and make an appointment, call and arrange a time and a date and visit. And often they'll be very open and helpful to answering your questions. Internet, Facebook page, and I have a DVD set I'll show you later if you're interested. Oh, I just wanted to say that for 28 years, I coordinated the Greenhouse Tomato Short Course, which was held in Mississippi all those years. And this was one of the short courses there with people learning, and it worked out really well. We had growers from 25 plus states each year in the session. But I stopped doing it last year, and instead I'm doing programs like this with other states and traveling around and speaking to grower groups, which I love to do. The greenhouse structure. In the Greenhouse Tomato Handbook, and I will point to you where to get it online for free. I have a vendors list in the last 5 or 6 pages of the bulletin. So look in there for vendors for greenhouses, vendors for fertilizers, irrigation, greenhouse supplies, all kinds of things, plastics, etc. So figure out what size you want to grow, and we'll talk about how big it should be to start in a minute. Your site location, will you be selling on site or will you be carrying everything off to stores? And then essential, plan on drainage. You need a 1 to 2% slope from end to end in the greenhouse. Why is that? Well, the water has to go somewhere. Plants don't use all the water you apply. A lot of the water will drain out the bottom of your containers, and you certainly don't want it to pool up and make puddles and wet, slippery areas in the greenhouse. So the water has to exit the greenhouse. Language. When you're new to a field, there's often a barrier with the language. So several years back, a grower pointed that out to me at my short course. That what are you talking about when you say peduncle and cluster and truss and calyx? What are these? So I wrote a bulletin, Greenhouse Tomato Growers Glossary. And you can see on the right, we have biological control and blossom end rot and things like that. You'll be able to get this one as a free download as well. So I recommend if you're new to the field, go ahead and download that and read through it. This is the thing I tell growers more than anything else, especially when a grower is new and wants to start with an acre, which can be 1,800-foot greenhouses. I always say start small. Start small. Start with 1 bay. If you have to, 2 bays, but not acres, not 12 greenhouses. So this grower on the right, listen to me. He started small. That's a nice starter greenhouse there, and his business went so well that I heard that the following year he was able to double in size. So who's going to do all the work? There is work. These plants do not grow themselves. Labor. There's an average of 20 hours per week per bay. That's per freestanding or gutter connected bay over the life of the whole crop. Now that's averaged. Early in the crop, there's not as much to do. You put your plants in, they're not flowering yet, they're certainly not producing yet. But later in the crop, you're doing everything. You're suckering every week, you're twisting the string around the stems, you're harvesting, you're grading, you're packing, you're spraying, you're maintaining your irrigation equipment, you're doing so many different things, and it will be more than 20 hours per week. So this is the average over the lifespan of the crop. Will you do it all? You have family labor, you have in-laws, uncles, nephews. The labor needs to be worked out ahead. If you're small, 1 or 2 bays, maybe 3 bays, you can do it all yourself or with assistance from family labor if they're willing and able to help you. If you're bigger than that and you need to hire part-time labor, make sure you do line that up so the labor's there when you need it. And if you're bigger, like 6 bays, an acre, 10 bays, definitely you will need some full-time labor. So put that in your spreadsheet, how much the labor gets and what your total income will be and how much profit is there, because you want to make sure that the labor is not the only person who makes money on this. In other words, you don't want to have 2 bays and have a full-time worker in there because there's not going to be much left for you. And I will answer questions at the end. I think I saw a question pop up, but I think in this kind of format, it's better to run through the top. Temperature control. Temperature is very important for tomatoes, like it is for any crop. And in the greenhouse, your main advantage, as we said, is temperature control. So take advantage of that and keep the temperature in the right band so the plants can perform to the best yield and highest quality. So your heating system, your minimum set point should be 64 for tomatoes. Now, how about 60? What if I go to 60? Well, it's not going to kill the plants. The plants will still survive. But you start to run into problems with mineral nutrient uptake, with transport in the plant. Cool weather will cause more defects like rough fruit. Rough fruit is when you get ridges along the top of the tomato. Also, if you get lower than that, you'll see some cat facing. You'll see some misshapen fruit. So no, the plants will not die. The yield may go down a little bit, but what really is the problem is you'll get a lot more culls or defect fruit. So instead of 95% number one quality, you might drop to 80% or 60%. So your profit will be better if you stay warm enough. Fans, in the deep south here, where I am, I tell growers just try to keep it under 90 because that's all you can do. So if you can keep it, 75 to 80 would be perfect, but I know that's impossible in the warm, humid time of the year in Connecticut and the Northeast, just like in the Southeast. Vents are how the air comes into the greenhouse. Horizontal airflow, or HAF, are fans that blow the air within the greenhouse. So normally you'd want 4 of these HAF fans per bay, 2 blowing north and the other 2 blowing south, assuming your greenhouses are oriented north and south. Shade materials are one of the techniques for keeping some of that excess light out of the greenhouse in the warm season, and that will help cool the greenhouse. Another technique is the pad and fan cooling system, which is evaporative cooling pads. These pads go on one end of the greenhouse, and when the exhaust fans come on, the exhaust fans blow air out of the greenhouse and draw fresh air into the vent and through the wet pads. And with evaporative cooling, you will cool a few degrees. Fogging is the same technology, except the fog nozzles are above the crop. So the advantage of fogging is that the fog comes over the entire crop, so you get a more uniform cooling effect. With pad and fan, you get more cooling near the pad and far less cooling at the opposite end of the greenhouse. Incidentally, fogging means the water is under pressure, such as 100 psi or above, and the water droplets are very tiny. So when you walk through the greenhouse, you don't get wet. You see the fog, but you don't get wet. And that's important for the plants because you don't really want the leaves getting wet either. Wet leaves are a perfect place for fungi to reproduce and get established. One of the other most asked questions besides size is how many plants can I grow? Well, I always go back with a question. How long is your greenhouse? How wide is your greenhouse? Multiply those, divide by 5, and that will tell you how many plants in the greenhouse using 5 square feet per plant. And this is an area where I did some research, and I found that 5 square feet per plant was optimum. So that's what I've been recommending. What happens if you want to pack more in the greenhouse? So suppose you divide length times width divide by 5, and it comes out around 600 plants, and you want to put 800 in there. Well, you can grow 800 in there, but remember this, you have 200 more plants, which means more seeds, more fertilizers, more water, more string, more plant clips, more labor for pollinating, more everything. So won't that increase your yield? Actually, no. When you pack the plants in tighter than the recommended plant population, the yield per plant drops. So the yield per greenhouse stays about the same. So if you're getting so many boxes per greenhouse with 5 square feet, with 600 plants, you'll get about the same if you put in a couple hundred extra plants. So your extra work, extra expense, same yield per greenhouse. But there's a problem. The problem is the quality goes down. When the plants are crowded, you do get more physiological disorders. So more misshapen fruit, more smaller fruit from the extra shading, zipper scar. There's all kinds of defects do increase significantly. And that's an area where I've researched, and the data was really clear. I'll point out one more thing. I don't know if you can see my pointer or not, but notice the V formation here. This is a single row of bags, but the plants are spread out. And first of all, how do we do that? Well, we have support wires above the crop, and instead of placing them right above the bags, spread them out 3 feet apart. So one there, 3 feet apart. When you run the strings from the base of the plant to the wire, it will cause a V formation. Why do we want this? The V formation allows light penetration much better than if the plants are just crowded together. You have a single row of bags or buckets, but it's a double row of plants, and you want ventilation and sunlight to get in the middle there. All kinds of tomatoes, right? There are tomatoes of every size, shape, and color, perfect and imperfection, just everything you can think of. What do we do in the greenhouse? Well, we want a really good variety for greenhouse production. So number one, you want to pick a greenhouse variety. There are varieties bred for greenhouse production. These varieties are adapted to the lower light, higher humidity, and general growing environment in a hydroponic system. That's number one. Number two, pick a variety with good yield and size. You're often looking at an 8 to 10 ounce tomato for beefsteak. Sometimes 10 is more of the median. Red color, and we'll get into exceptions in a minute. Excellent disease resistance. The varieties for greenhouses have better disease resistance than varieties for the home garden or for the field. The breeders have done an excellent job. And finally, free of disorders, cat facing and cracking and other things that tend to plague tomatoes. Well, find the ones that have resistance to disease and are free of most of the disorders, and you'll be way better off. So for greenhouse production, in most cases, you want red, indeterminate, meaning it will keep growing for many months, beefsteak, which refers to the size class. Now, if you have a good market for Roma, which are the paste tomatoes, or cherry tomatoes, or grape tomatoes, or some other size or shape, go for it. But make sure you're getting more per pound, because the example I use is, how long does it take to pick a pound of beefsteak tomatoes? Well, a pound will be 2. So, right, not very long at all. How long does it take to pick a pound of cherry tomatoes? A lot longer. They're about an ounce a piece. So you have 16 in a pound. So imagine doing that over an entire greenhouse. We don't grow that many cherry tomatoes or grape tomatoes in greenhouses in the US. There are a lot grown in Mexico, and a lot of them come to the US. So that's why you see them in the store. Greenhouse variety, I mentioned before, not the home garden type or field tomatoes, and deviate based on market demands. What varieties are out there? Well, there are hundreds of varieties out there. Most of them are not on the market in the US. You could get them if you wanted to. But the three that I am recommending now are these top three here: Big Dina, Trust, and Geronimo. These other ones are fine as well. I don't have as much experience with them, but in some parts of the US, they do very well. I want to point out that Trust is the oldest of these, and it's been around quite a while now. I still like it. I still recommend it. Um, the story is that it is being phased out with these more recent seed mergers, but if you can get it, I would still try to get it. I would still do it. As the companies are merging together and buying each other out, we're getting a lot of this, where the varieties that were on the market and really, really good are getting deleted from the inventory. So it's unfortunate because some of these, the growers grew very well and their customers love them, but they're gone. So if you're not sure what to grow, I'd start with these top three. This is what we're looking for when we harvest tomatoes. We want, like I mentioned before, uniform size, shape, and color in a box. When you deliver these boxes and the store opens the box, this is what they want to see. This is pretty close to perfection when it comes to produce. In some areas of the country, the calyx, this green part, is left on, and other areas it is removed. In Ontario, it's always left on. Ohio, it's mostly left on. And some other regional areas, the calyx is left on. Most of the country removes the calyx. The reason they're left on is because it distinguishes the greenhouse tomato from the field tomato. So it's like a little trademark there. But it's up to your store. If your store wants them on, leave them on. If they want them off, take them off. Growing medium. Growing medium is what you grow the plants in. It supports the roots and delivers the water and nutrients to the plant. So in the southeast, these pine bark is a very popular growing medium because we have a lot of pine trees. So these are composted 3 months or more. Fines, and fines are small pieces, 3/8 of an inch and less, not those nuggets that you buy for landscape mulch and all that. It works really well. Perlite is probably the most used for smaller growers in the US, and I highly recommend it. Coconut coir is another excellent growing medium. It is more expensive than pine bark or perlite, but the quality is very high. Rock wool is widely used in the huge ranges because it's very lightweight, easy to lay out. Again, it costs more than perlite or pine bark. And the thing you don't want to do is sand, just like river sand was widely used when I first started my job here. And we had so many complaints of bacterial wilt until our pathologist determined it was in the sand. So no river sand. And also, sand is really heavy. If you're filling bags with sand and moving them around, I mean, they can be 80 pounds a piece. Who needs that? Perlite, on the other hand, is super lightweight. So let's make it easy on ourselves and not break our backs. The right tools of the trade. There are lots of tools that you need to use that you will find that you need during the course of the crop. These are some that I call essential tools. Number one is a high-low thermometer. A high-low thermometer will show you the temperature, like any thermometer, but it will also record the highest and lowest during a 24-hour period. So like if you're having some problem with your fruit quality and you call your extension expert, and your specialist or agent will say, well, how cold did it get in the greenhouse? And if the grower says, my thermostat is on 64, you know what? That doesn't answer the question. So how cold it gets in the greenhouse will be shown on the high-low thermometer as it records the lowest point. And often thermostats are not very accurate at all. So this is a great way to know what it's actually getting to in the greenhouse, the high or the low. And then push the button or use the reset on it, however it resets. So next time you know what the high and low are. Very important. Secondly, the pH meter and the EC meter. pH measures the acidity or alkalinity of your nutrient solution. And we'll talk about pH very soon. And the EC meter, it measures the total dissolved fertilizer in the water. It is electroconductivity. So it gives you a reading of total solution in the water in millimoles is the unit that I prefer. And then finally, you need to pollinate tomatoes in the greenhouse. If you have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 bays, you can easily do this with an electric pollinator. These are available from the greenhouse suppliers. Pollinate every other day towards the middle of the day when your humidity is lower, and touch the pedicel, which is the stem under a flower cluster, and not the flowers. You don't want to risk knocking flowers off your plant because that reduces your yield. And it only takes part of a second for that pollen to fly. So you're pollinating any yellow flower. If you don't want to use a pollinator and your greenhouse is bigger, bees. These are bumblebees, not honeybees. You purchase the hives and work with your vendor and discuss how big your greenhouse range is. And the vendor will help you decide what size hive. There are 3 or 4 different sizes, and then how often you need to replace them. They only last an average of 8 weeks. So you need to get the new ones in before the current ones totally phase out. Irrigation system. So you need to design a good irrigation system, and it's not as simple as it sounds, because you do have to deal with solutions, and you don't want particles from the fertilizer going down the lines. So you need to talk about filters. You need to talk about emitters, especially pressure compensating emitters. So you don't get excess water in some plants and not enough in other plants. And then plan on fertigation. Fertigation is when you dissolve fertilizer in the water, and you, instead of irrigating, you fertigate. So every time they get water, they get a dilute fertilization, not a strong fertilization like you get with Miracle-Gro or something. It's very dilute. So to fertigate, you can either use a bulk tank, which is a large tank, or an injector system. And this type is the most common and economical. These are, I'm not supporting any brands, but these are either Dosatrons or Dosmatics. This is an Anderson injector. It's excellent, top quality, very expensive. So if you're a small to mid-sized grower, these will work great. So plan on fertigation. Fertilization and nutrition. Number 1, use a hydroponic tomato fertilizer. In other words, you don't want to use an all-purpose greenhouse fertilizer like Peter's 20-20-20. That's probably the most common greenhouse fertilizer, and it's excellent for ornamental plants, bedding plants, etc. Not for tomatoes, so don't use this on tomatoes for production. So you want to make sure it's labeled for hydroponic tomatoes. pH. Here's my recommended pH, 5.6 to 5.8. And you're thinking, wow, that's sort of acidic, isn't it? Yes, it is. But that range is ideal for uptake of most nutrients. It's the midpoint between the ones that prefer it a little higher and a little lower. So that's the ideal. And also having your pH on the acidic side will give you more acid flavor in the fruit. And finally, get a regular tissue analysis. This could be every week, it could be every 2 weeks, but you get a report and it tells you if your elements are in the sufficiency ranges or not. Then you can make adjustments. We're not discussing these plants in this talk, but we will in the talk later on today. How do you take a tissue analysis? Take 10 to 12 leaves randomized from throughout the greenhouse. So obviously you don't want 10 leaves off one plant. And less obviously, you don't want to take leaves from injured or sick looking plants. You want them to represent the entire greenhouse. So pick them from throughout the greenhouse, and you want them to be the same age. The leaves should all be the same physiological age. So the textbook example is pick the 8th leaf from the top. I find that people often have trouble because which leaf is number 1? Is it the leaf that's 6 inches? Is it the leaf that's 1 inch? So instead of that, look for where your fruit are about the size of a golf ball and take the leaf across from it and slightly above. And that leaf will be the same physiological age on every plant. Send those to the lab and they'll send you your results. And remember, a leaf is the entire leaf, not a leaflet. The leaves are made up of leaflets. And that's what we see here. So if my pointer works, I really don't know if it's working. This is a leaf. These are leaflets on the leaf. So you want the entire leaf. And when you're suckering your tomatoes, which is removing the axillary or side shoots, you want to remove them like this on the right, when they're just a couple inches long, preferably. Every leaf where it attaches to the stem has a sucker. That is what is removed. Sometimes beginners will accidentally remove this, which is not a sucker, it's the growing tip, the top, or accidentally remove the flower cluster, which, once again, will reduce your yield. We don't want to do that. So know your tomato anatomy if you're new. I'm sure most of you know this already. So suckering is a once-a-week job in the greenhouse. So what makes tomatoes taste good? Correct fertility is really important. If the fertilizer is too weak, your tomatoes will taste bland. Higher EC improves flavor, but you don't want to overdo it either because you run into salinity problems in the root zone. Correct pH, lower pH improves flavor as well. And we talked about that, 5.6 to 5.8 or close to it. If a grower calls and says my pH is 5.9, what kind of acid should I add? I'll say don't do anything because I'm afraid if they add too much, they're going to end up with a pH of 3. So anyway, that just for caution. If it's close enough, it's good. Maturity is the tomatoes ripen on the vine, the sugars develop fully, and the tomato will have better flavor. And finally, lots of sun. So when I work with kids groups, I'll say, what do plants do for a living? And of course, they think I'm crazy asking that, but what plants do for a living is they take sun, turn it into sugar. So lots of sun means more sugars and more flavor. Most people want acidity and sweetness together. Not everybody. Support system. Support system is the wires above the crop and the strings that support each and every plant. So typically you put the wires 7 feet off the ground, and as I said, space them 3 feet apart. You get the V formation. If you happen to be 6'4", it's okay to make the wires higher if you'll be doing the work with the plant. And if you're 5 feet, you don't need 7 feet off the ground because you won't be able to reach the wires. So the support is very important. The greenhouse should be solid enough to support it, because if you have 600 plants with fruit load, the plants can weigh 3 to 4 tons. So you don't want this on a flimsy greenhouse where it will pull it down and collapse it. So you tie the strings to the wire above, and then you clip it. The string you clip to the base of the plant with plant clips. Pruning and training. So you train to one main stem, not big bushy plants. Remove the suckers once a week. I mentioned tying the strings to the top and to the bottom. Attach the clip under a leaf, not under a flower cluster or fruit, because you don't want that clip to strip the flowers off under tension. Once a week, either add a plant clip near the top or twist the string around the stem, always in the same direction. If you start clockwise, keep going clockwise. Maintain your equipment, heaters, fans, vents, emitters, injectors, pumps, and everything else. Make sure the heaters are ready before your typical cool season comes along. So, a month before you expect it to be cool, turn on the heaters, make sure they work. This catches at least a couple growers every year where they don't turn it on until they're having a really cold night and no propane, or it won't come on. I don't know what's wrong. Okay, you don't want to do that. If you're a worrier, you'll be a better grower, so you check your work. After you mix your fertilizers, you check the pH and the EC of the solution. And a nice trick I tell people is take a gallon jug and stick an extra emitter in the line somewhere and stick that extra emitter in the jug. So once a day, you can get a quick look at how many ounces or how many milliliters you're putting out. Because like if you get wilted plants, for example, your specialist will say, well, how many ounces a day are you putting out per plant? And I don't know is not a really good answer. But if you say, well, I'm putting out about a quart per plant. And what stage are your plants at? I'm at the 6th cluster. Well, a quart per day is not enough. You want to double that. So my rule of thumb is 2 quarts per plant per day. And this is when the plants are approaching full size, not when they're little, of course. So you walk the greenhouse every day. You look for wilted plants. You look for something crawling, white flies, fungus gnats, leaf miners. Just keep an eye out every single day. You have diagnostics resources available to you. You have local agents, area agents, specialists, digital diagnostics. You have a phone, it has a camera. Snap the picture, email it to your agent or specialist or your lab, and you can often very quickly get answers. In our diagnostics lab, the person who runs the lab, I've talked to her, and she said that in maybe 75 to 80% of the time, she can diagnose from the picture. The other times, she will want a live sample. So this can really speed up your diagnostics. Friends in the business. I'm sure you know other people in the business. It's okay to communicate with them. Maybe they had the same problem last year, and they can share what they did. And these defects, again, we'll get into these in my later talk today. So when you're a grower, remember, you're not just growing tomatoes. Of course, you want to sell them, but in order to sell them, you need to be a marketer. So you're always representing your crop and explaining why is it better than field-grown tomatoes or tomatoes shipped from Mexico or tomatoes shipped from South Florida. Why is it better? So you need to promote your crop and represent it well. That's how you get more sales. So what is good about it? Vine ripened, as we mentioned, good red color, good flavor, locally grown, even in the winter months, no breakers or gassed with ethylene, uniform size and shape, makes a very nice presentation in the grocery store. Tomatoes have a lot of nutrition and health benefits, so don't hesitate to point out that the red color in tomatoes is from lycopene, and we know lycopene helps fight cancer. But excellent quality leads to higher value. So be sure you're getting a decent price for your tomatoes. You sell quality by grading your fruit well. Anything that is not looking really, really nice, like you would want to buy it, don't sell it as a number one. Sell it, if you want to sell it, put it as a number two or cull fruit, and not to the same buyer. You might want to retail these, where people can pick them up and look at them and make their own decisions, sell them at a lower price. But it's not good to sell to the same buyer, because what if they get mixed on the shelf and it lowers the quality, the average quality of all of your fruit? So build a reputation, and then customers are happy, they keep coming back, and they'll look for your greenhouse produce. So that's why it's good to develop a brand name and a logo. So when do you harvest? You're retailing at the greenhouse or very close. You want this light red, red ripe. That means you pick it and you sell it the same day or the next day. If you're shipping wholesale at all, you can go into these pinks. So light red and pink, depending on if they're selling them the next day or 2 or 3 days away. If you're in the deep south, you always have to have some green for the retail market, because fried green tomatoes are very popular. But generally, you don't want to harvest in this range. The breakers are the ones harvested when they have this almost imaginary breakout of color at the blossom end, and they will ripen after that, but they'll never taste as good as a vine ripe. So let's not do that. Well, maybe fried green tomatoes are popular in Connecticut and New York as well. I've been away too long and just don't know. The stickers. I really like stickers for promotion, and this means getting a sticker made and put it on every single fruit. So the labels, an estimate of the cost for a 3-inch label that's round, like this one, it's about 5 for a penny. This is one that you design, and your vendor will print for you in rolls. And yes, it takes a little bit of time, but a second per fruit, maybe. Put a sticker on every single fruit and highlight what's good about your stuff. Greenhouse, locally grown, vine ripened. If it's organic, say organic. If it's insecticide free, you can say that. Or pesticide free, you can do that. You don't want to put anything down that's not true, of course. Greenhouse, just decide which are the most important terms to identify your crop and get it on the sticker. And you can put the name of your company on there too, or a logo, a picture. Your resources. For this talk, I recommend Greenhouse Tomato Handbook. I'll show you the website in a minute. I put handout today because I was bringing these to New Haven, but instead it's online, so you can still get it. The glossary I mentioned before. Another good one you might want to look at is environmental control for greenhouse tomatoes. What size vent should I put in? What size fans? Horizontal airflow fans. How do I do cooling in the greenhouse? What are the different techniques? And then another good one that was just revised last year, the pest management. It says in Mississippi, but hey, you get the same pests we do. And then the budget is in there, and several others. So all on the website, and no charge. The handbook, También en Español. If you need one in Spanish, send me an email. I have one that was translated several years ago. I'd be happy to send it. So you look for this on the website, and you can see it covers quite a bit of territory. And then the suppliers are in there as well, in Appendix 2. So where do we go? You can either click or write down this, or tell you the truth, if you just Google greenhouse tomato FAQ, and if you want, put Mississippi or Snyder in there, you'll find this. But if you want to write it all down, I know it's a terribly long URL, there it is. And we have a Facebook page that was for the short course. I still post newsworthy items in there about greenhouse ranges that are going in or new technology. So that's available too. If you go to Facebook and search for a greenhouse tomato short course, you'll find that.